So it's a lot of pleasure. Been looking forward to hearing our poet tonight. Mike was born and raised in Cossack Bay, Oregon. He lives sometimes in Cossack Bay, and I'm going to say in Portland as well. His books include 2 volumes of poetry, Home Burial, which was out last year in 2012, published by Copper Canyon Press, and Dismantling the Hills, Pit Poetry Series in 2008. He's also done a translation of Thomas Transformers, I hope I pronounced that right, The Sorrow Gondola, and an edition of David Weeville's Essential Writings to Build My Shadow of Fire. And I know he's from Cossack Bay. I also, he lives part of the time in Portland because he and Carl Adamczyk co-edit Tavern Books. So he's come a long way to be our reader tonight. I've been looking forward to it. Would you join me in welcoming our poet tonight, Michael McGriff? Mike?
Thank you, sir. All right. Stopwatch. Cool. Thanks so much for having me and for making this nifty broadside, which is totally great. Thanks to the library and to the Pond House and to the city and to everyone who volunteers and helps here. I'm going to start out tonight by reading a poem by Richard Shelton, a poet who I really love, and it's called New Year's Eve, so I thought that was appropriate. New Year's Eve. You can do it. The year is boarding a clipper ship with frozen sails. Soon it will depart through the terrible refraction of water, carrying dust in its mouth. It has nothing particular to recommend it. No Halley's Comet, no quintuplets, no 2-headed calf. It leaves no watermark on the wallpaper. Yet it was sweet. It was sweet to us. It was built from the raw materials of small disasters and a summer when the birds ate all the peaches. We feel as if we have been telling stories to which no one listened. And it leaves behind a display case from which each of us chooses his own hands. The hands fit us like gloves, and we slip them on. We stand on the dock clutching our dead gods and old poets, while the ship lingers like the afterbirth of sound, the silent bombast at the terminal of memory. A little poem from Richard Shelton, great poet. Now I'll read this broadside poem. My Man From Frosty and I do lots of motorcycle camping in Oregon. And 2 summers ago, we were at the White River. And I wrote this poem in my tent while we were camping there. Sleeping beside White River for Frosty Davis. The moon is fishing for compliments along the sandbar, and I'm holding a banquet for our separateness. A white table runner unfolding forever out and away. The river and its mineral echoes, gravel roads like an idea for the map of a drunk's broken hand, the ferns in their gowns of dust, and the glaciers off to the west, telling their usual lies about beauty. Rat in the ditch of my heart, gnawing at a plastic bag, your crown of long vowels tilted to one side, gleaming, funereal, certain, and with music. Thanks for making this broadside. It's super cool. So tonight I'm going to read some poems from my recent book, Home Burial, and a bunch of new poems, and some new ones that I wrote in the last 3 weeks. I begin my book with an epigraph from the musician Jason Molina, who died last year, a guy my age who I totally admire. And the epigraph is, "Here comes midnight with the dead moon in its jaws." Kissing Hitler. I've tried to keep the landscape buried in my chest in its teak box. But tonight, awakened by the sound of my name strung between the trees, I see the box on my nightstand giving off a kind of light you never know you belong to until you see it dance from a pile of metal shavings or shaken loose from a sword fern's root wad. It's the same light that trailed me the entire summer of my 16th year, driving County Road 64 toward Powerline Ridge, the 3 radio towers blinking in the Oregon dark. Between each red pulse, the dark hung its birthrights in front of me, a few dead branches crawling up from the ditch, a lost bolt of mooncloth snagged on a barbed wire fence, shredding in the tide wind. The light my oldest friends slammed into their veins or offered to the night when they made amends. One of them, the tallest and toughest, the one who used to show up Saturdays for my mother's breakfast, he could juggle 5 eggs and recite the alphabet backward. He told me as he covered my hand with his while I downshifted to enter the gravel quarry that he wanted to punch the baby out of Jessica's stomach. He's the one tonight whose carbide hands have opened the lid of this little box. I can see the 2 of us now, kissing Hitler, that's what we called it, siphoning gas, huffing shop rags, and we kissed him everywhere, in other counties, with girls we barely knew telling us to hurry before someone called the cops. They can't arrest you for kissing Hitler. That's what we said. The last time I saw him, he sat on the edge of his father's girlfriend's bathtub, bleeding and laughing hard into a pink towel. I can't remember. Maybe it was a birthday party. Maybe we'd climbed in through the living room window, looking for a bottle or some pills. At the same moment, the adults stumbled in from the Silver Dollar, hardwired to liquor and crystal. That was a summer when people just went crazy. There we were, locked in the bathroom, someone yelling and throwing themselves against the door. My friend's blood fanned out behind him into points of red tar, into points so fine they made me think that someone, somewhere, must belong to a family that passes down the art of painting immaculate nasturtiums along the lips of bone china, the smallest detail touched into place by a single stiff horsehair, by a young father holding his breath, trying not to wake the child swaddled at his feet, his hand steady as 5 white mining burros sleeping in the rain. And this poem is called Catfish. It starts out with a little litany of supposed things that you can catch catfish with, which include everything under the planet, depending on what redneck you talk to. Catfish. The catfish have the night, but I have patience and a bucket of chicken guts. I have canned corn and shad blood, and I have nothing better to do than listen to the waters riffled dark, spill into the deep eddy where a 39 Ford coupe rests in the muck bottom. The dare growing up to swim down with pliers for the license plates, corpse bones, a little chrome. But even on the clearest days, even when the river runs low and clean, you can't see it, though you can often nearly see the movement of hair. I used to move through my days as someone agreeable to all the gears clicking in the world. I was a big, clumsy yes, tugged around by its collar. Yes to the mill, yes to the rain, yes to what passed for fistfights and sex. Yes to all the pine boards of thought waiting around for the hammer. The catfish have the night, and ancient gear oil for blood. They have a kind of greased demeanor and wet electricity that you can never boil out of them. The catfish have the night, but I have the kind of patience born of indifference and hate. Maybe the river and I share this. Maybe the obvious moon that bobs near the lip of the eddy is really a pocket watch, having finally made its way downstream from what must have been a serious accident. The station wagon and its family busting the guardrail, the steering wheel jumping into the man's chest, his pocket watch hurtling through the windshield and into the river. Wind the hands in one direction and see into the exact moment of your death. Wind them the other way and see all the tiny ways you've already died. I'm going to put this in my breast pocket, just as it is. Metal heart that will catch the stray bullet in its teeth. I chum the water. I thread the barb. I feel something move in the dark. So most of these poems are ostensibly set in Cossack Bay, where I'm from. In February, she looks at the apple trees and imagines rows of people standing in line for something. She even dreamt once of being among them, waiting patiently to enter the open doorway of the earth, which shone with a light so forgiving it could have spoken. Her son's been dead nearly a year, And yesterday, while driving to the feed store, she braked suddenly and threw her arm across the rib cage of his absence. The ice grows down the ruts of the gravel driveway, the possum by the well frozen in place for over a week. Wood smoke hangs halfway up the trees. The air is still. Gunshots can be heard for miles, and every kind of water and laughter. It's another kind of New Year's poem. New season. Beside our neighbor's half-framed barn, the hip bones of a dead deer continue to be stripped and polished by the rain, an arc of gray electricity traveling between them. And the water collecting in the ashtray on the porch isn't a lake, but it's big enough for God to stick his thumb in. I admire the rats in the wall. They rejoice in the night. They call to each other as they work. This poem is called Invocation, and I'm using the word in the religious sense. Invocation. Out there somewhere, you are a variable in the night's equation. I listen hard to the hands of smoke moving beneath the river, to the abandoned grain elevator dragging its chains through the tender blood of the night. I listen to the hush of your name as it subtracted from one darkness, then added to another. I pray to what you are not. You are the opposite of a horse. Your hair is not the 7 colors of cemetery grass. Your mouth is not a dead moon, nor is it the winter branches preparing their skeletons for the wind. A double thread of darkness winds through me, and the night's coarse tongue scrapes your name against the trees. I found a good spot by the river. The trees line up along either bank and bend toward the center. I've been trying to get rid of that part of myself that I most despise, but need most to survive. It rises like wood smoke. It's shaped like a brass key, and the hole it looks to enter can be seen through, revealing a banquet hall with one chair and countless silver trays piled with rags. Is your voice in the linden wood of an oar, your face in the daily ritual of the cooper's hawk? Is your charity the green rot of a fence post? Are you near me as I clean this ashtray with my sleeve? Are you the dead doe's skull shining from within itself? I've been pretending not to hear it speak to me, even though I've entered its voice, hung my coat from a nail in its pantry without bumping the table or creaking the floor, and moved in the utter darkness of it. It's finally late enough that all sounds are the sounds of water. If you die tonight, I'll wash your feet. I'll remove the batteries from the clocks. And the 2 moths that drown in the lakes of your eyes will manage the rest. This poem is called Youre the Rat. It makes reference to something called burning wire, which is stealing a bundle of commercial wiring and melting off the coating so you can hawk the copper. Meth addicts usually end up doing this. Youre the Rat. I winch up the sky between the shed roof and the ridge and stand dumb as a goat beneath its arrows and buckets, its harmonies and hungers. Each night I feel a speck of fire twisting in my gut, and each night I ask the Lord the same questions, and by morning the same spools of barbed wire hang on the barn wall above footlockers of dynamite. We used to own everything between the river and the road. We bought permits for home burials and kept a horse's skull above the door. We divided the land, we filled in the wells, we spit in the river, we walked among the cows and kept the shovel sharp. Tonight I'm sitting on the back porch of the universe in the first dark hours of the year of the rat. I'm tuned in to AM 520, and depending on how intently I stare into the black blooms of the sky, it bounces either to a high school football game or to the voices of rage, of plague and prophecy. The wind off the river is weak and alone, like the voice of my brother. He's trying to melt the plastic coating from a stolen bundle of commercial wiring, a black trickle of smoke winding through his body to empty itself into a pool that shimmers with the ink of nothing. If I had faith in the stars, I'd let those 4 there be the constellation of my brother, lying flat on the ground, asking for money. I like the song he almost sings, the one he doesn't know the words to, but hums to himself in these few moments of absolute stillness. And I like how he's resting with his hands under his head as he stretches out among the dark echoes and spindled light of all that black wheat. Note left for my former self. I've seen a group of farm kids hypnotize a rabbit by pinning it on its back and stroking its neck. This is what I think of when I see you in the night. Not the trick, but the distress call we manage to send out while we are pinned to our stillness. Crows. 9 varieties of crows whoop and gnash in my bloodstream. I'm overcome with 9 particular kinds of joy as I cross under the power lines along the Railyard. The tracks touch in the horizon, forming the tip of an exquisite beak. The residents of the night. It's always night. Oh, we all know this from being Oregonians. In the 70s, we blasted that big whale up near Florence there. 500-pound chunks of blubber came down. Almost killed half a dozen people. It's on YouTube. The residents of the night. It's always night inside the whales, even when they heave themselves onto the shore, where they death hiss and wheeze and balloon with gas, even when we dynamite them back into the night. The night inside a barn owl's wing hush is the handshake of a secret order. It's inside the way we pass one another at the grocery store, the feed lot, the way we lower our wet ropes into each other. It's night inside the peacocks, whose cries cut through us like the prow of a ship, whose cauldrons of whale oil shine their darkness up to the floating ribs of the moon. It's in the way we tend to the churches of our skulls, where the night swings its smoking chains and arranges its candles. The tractor, of course, is filled with it. It won't start until you summon the lampblack in the river of your blood, where the sturgeon are decimal points moving upstream, 0 by 0. The Book of Hours, Hours. The first time I handled a snake, I picked up what I mistook for a husk of shed skin. I lifted it high into the barn's dust-tipped heat. The hay bales trembled as I pressed my lips to its hinge of light, the eternal mathematics of its living head. When I lived in Eugene, I used to work at a Georgia Pacific veneer, and when a new woman was hired, it was a big deal, because everyone went crazy in the break room. So this is called In the Break Room. The mill holds us in its mouth, the graveyard shift and its floodlights. There's a stillness between us as we eat our sandwiches and leftovers. Back in town, someone's daughter stays up all night eating her own hair. A woman on 3rd Street applies makeup to a corpse she's recently washed. A cop drifts over a fog line in his Crown Victoria. Todd thinks the foreman's new girlfriend looks like a country singer. Her hair shines like broken glass. She rests her hand on the animal of sleep, and it leans against her leg. In 15 minutes, she'll crawl up a ladder into a metal cage where hot sheets of plywood shoot out one after another, like a satanic card trick, and she'll guide them by the edge in midair and let them drop to the sorter, until she closes her eyes, just long enough to float upon the waters where sleep winds through the cattails. When a sheet of veneer tears her face open, a corpse's hands will be placed together. The cop will drive his cruiser into the river. which will soon fill with a daylight our curses may never reach. Against my will. Against my will, I am reborn as a bird who claws its way from the throat of a man who never cared for the moth light of August, who never read the cosmologies of rain or the doctrines of silt, who never walked into the static death light the goats tear away from the clover, a man who bled himself of axle grease, Keno tickets, and county roads named for men whose legacies are stop signs rattled in buckshot and gray light. The night keeps painting its tongue black, and I am reborn as a bird who flies from the throat of a man who gives no thought to January's frozen moon crush, twisting the alder branches from their trees. Against my will, I am reborn into a land stretched flat and bled of its salt and black ice, of its choked roots and bird's blood looped through the islets of the southerly winds. I am reborn as a denier of barn dust, pinion moans, stolen hand tools, and chipped dishes. I am reborn with no thought for the river's breath pulling a tune through the cathedral ribs of a common rat. I am reborn as one free of reduction gears, ash buckets, green sparks, analog currents, amphetamines pounding inside the stubborn machine of the horse's skull. I am reborn into the darkest hour and its search parties, their flashlights dimming as the morning brightens the room, where I am reborn as a bird who claws its way from the throat of a man who wears my name for a face and the heavy jewels of compliance around his wrist. I fly through the window of his voice and make my way to the edge of the continent, where the scrub trees cower from the shore, and I discover, like the trees here, it's against my nature to look out over the sea. Salt disasters rage and burn the feathers on my back. I open my mouth, and it's the man's voice calling me home. So that's how the book ends there. Maybe read one more out of that at the end. So here's a bunch of new poems. And I think this book could possibly be called Ox in the Year of the Horse. It's kind of a mix of short landscape poems and some sort of love poems and a few little erotic doodads. Highway 67. The night sky and its pageants of ink, its barrel fires, its immigrant stowaways, its stars like silverware drawers emptied into some hallway of memory, its rodeo clown grin spreading across the hills, its desire to light up the ears of the mule, the way it ties our wrists together with baling wire, the wick of it, its deep dark prow, the hive and hum of its gearbox, its salt, the whale bones it drags through the meridian, the way it dreams the dreams of dreams, the way I swell like a cedar plank when the night sky opens its canning jars of smoke as I press my tongue to that wet rope of a vein in your neck. Powder Creek. We all know the Powder River. Is that east? It's over there in the state. Way over there by Burns. And then Powder Creek is a little more north of that. Powder Creek. It's true. I've seen wild donkeys dusted in frozen rain. I'm full of dead lawn chairs, Keno tickets, gray fires burning at the edges of small towns, parking lots in the fog. I'm dumb as a cistern. I'm the wrong mix of air and gasoline. I'm a piano stored in a barn. I can hear the snow fences near Powder Creek trying to draw my grave on December's maps. But I have pressed my ear to the hive of your back, with its blue vapors and lost tribes. I have listened to the owls coursing inside you. I have held the night's wrist against my face, which is also your wrist. I am trying to get back to your thin eyelids and the signal fires of your hips. I am on the edge of the pier, waiting for you to pour your oil through the grand machine of me. Opening Gambit. Two decommissioned highways cross and continue toward their borders, with the casual certainty the dead carry in their sample cases. Leaning against the wind, I notice tufts of fur in the air and a drive shaft rising from the sand. Then the horsehair of a violinist's bow drawn steadily across my neck. Flat light. This hour and its blue wave slips from its world to ours beneath the camber of your foot. The snow across the fields and its all at once here, all at once gone. The light stretched flat and dreamless, and the power lines touching their foreheads to the ground. I have an unconcern that sways in me like a trawler. This is a poem called Near Dingle Creek, which is a creek that runs by the Steens. And the Steens Mountains are the only place in America that are they're more than 100 miles away from a Walmart, Starbucks, and McDonald's. It's the only place in America that fits those parameters. In the whole country. So this is Dingle Creek runs near the Steens. According to certain parameters, I'm standing in the most remote point in America, and my left hand rests on the long ellipse of the evening. Other parameters have not been met, and my life is a shop rag stuffed into a wasp's nest, diesel-soaked and alight, a whimper trickling through the canyon's dusty ear. As I scrape at my truck's corroded battery terminals with a screwdriver, a small pile of bones makes a nest in my shadow. I'm standing on the old seafloor, east of the Cascades, where owls live in burrows, and the parameters for the sky include roots and smoke harvested from red clay. New Year. After 4 winters, rail service has returned to town. The wind is painting new suicidal minutes on the face of the clock over the boathouse. The grass is defiant, wild, frost-brined, and reluctant to take any shape. It also carries the sound of the wind, which has just lain down in the grave of my hands. Railyard. The Railyard draws an arrow to the edge of my country. The weeds exploding their colors around the empty terminal were once immigrants. They touched their foreheads together in another time. I can almost hear a table being set, a deck of cards slid across the crushed lip of its box. The memory of smoke hangs low in the valley, and though there are no trains, a few dogs run mad beside them through the tall, impossibly blue grass. These poems I've been working on are sort of influenced by Giannis Ritsos' short poems. He's all I've been reading for the past couple years. He and Richard Shelton. And so they get smaller and smaller, you know. Great Greek poet, Giannis Ritsos, post-war poet. Relatives of the dead. The dead man's suit coat is a good fit through the shoulders. The last thing he touched is the first thing I touch, the silky floral lining inside the left sleeve. In both our skies, spools of black thread unravel over the graves of close friends. And for those of you who may be familiar with Cossack Bay, it had one great bar called Rogers Zoo. And I always tell this anecdote when I read this poem. Rogers is wild old hippie. He owned a bunch of dive bars in Eugene and this great bar in Cossack Bay. And it's just full of lefty, wobbly propaganda and all this weird acid trippy kind of stuff. And one year in the 80s, he took out an ad in the paper that said, more more TV screens in Rogers Zoo for the Super Bowl than any bar in Oregon. And so all these rednecks show up for the football game, of course. But what he had done is gone to every junk store he could find, gotten all the TVs and gutted them out, and made this art installation in the bar with like 200 fronts of televisions that didn't work. And, he's this huge brute with this silver ponytail, and you couldn't mess with him, so, it was great. That bar just closed down. He just sold it and retired, which is very sad. It's a great cultural institution. Shooting possums from the back porch of Roger's bar. The bones in the possum's hand are a set of reduction gears, turning in a machine that brings light to this valley of burnt oil and narrow rivers. My favorite drunks, a few chairs away, laughing hard, forming a theory of everything. It's my Richard Hugo, Death of the Kapowsin Tavern knockoff there. Great poem. The Afterlife. All right, the afterlife. Even here, the cows look like diesel engines not worth repairing. The rumor of a Ferris wheel buried on its side near the chrome plant is too much to resist. And my brother is flat on his stomach, hands bound, the horses in front of him stamping in place, ready to drag him for eternity as soon as I drop the red kerchief from my iron fist. With Delmore. With a few slits and a hard yank, Delmore prom-dressed the brush rabbit, then tossed its pelt to the river. Just because it looks like an eye, Delmore would say of the moon, doesn't mean it can see shit. He smelled like a gopher snake in a dry woodshed. He drank coffee the color of grasshopper spit. He had the face of a shad and thin wrists. I've seen things and I know things, he would say. The sky opened its mouth over the hills and struck a match on its dry tooth. It lit up the water. The pelt spun in the black thorns of an eddy, then disappeared into some long paragraph of the dark. Walking the property line. There is a barn full of light building itself inside me. Rafters, floor joists, the old plank flooring, everything touched by the kind of light you always knew existed but never knew the name of. The light carries the sound of wild turkeys scurrying the barbed wire fence near the one-stop sign for 8 miles. The sound of the tide waltzing in on its dark stilts. The sound of winter's runoff creeks and gray-throated rocks. I have set a table. It is simple. I am waiting for you there. When I see you, I will kiss the top of your head, the way a saint kisses the feet of a stranger. I will light you on fire and carry you into the night. Overlook, Cape Arago. These waters ask permission of nothing, and I have placed my thoughts for you in a nest of copper shavings. December tries on its glittering outfits in the mirrors of our bodies. At the end of the long hallway of your voice is a room with a globe, where the sounds of green rivers and the names of small towns share their secrets in the late dusty light. Snake, burns, powder. I've translated your name into all the languages of salt. I've sent each one out on a small raft across the ink-dark thorns grinding in the Pacific. Between the cargo nets of your throat and my mouth is something that will outlast the dark. If you are water. If you are water, the old pilings near the boat ramp are telling me the story of the bioluminescence you are filled with. Tonight, the whiskey fires burning on the moon move through me like a hammer swung in the dark. And if you are water, the moon is painting itself across you. If you are water, I am running my hands through you. If you are water, then my left hand is a horse thief, and my right hand is alder smoke drifting the ridge. I am the old dike road, and you are pushing your wet shoulders into the black silt of me. I am a piece of glass falling through itself, if you are water. But you are not water, and I am on my knees bent over the edge of the dock, moving my hands through the bioluminescence, the vague glimmer of distant cities coiled around each finger. Then Sleeping Beside White River also goes in this book, but I already read that poem. I am an ox in the year of the horse. Your hands have made a yoke, a bright chain of grinding stars around my neck, and you are pulling me into you, and you have turned me into an ox of mineral fires and sweat, and you are working me, and I can't tell whether I'm falling inside you or climbing the mantled dark of you. But I can feel myself moving through the origin of numbers and carbon, and I can feel your ankles lock around my back. And they too are giving their orders, but they are also two thrushes volleying their cries against the invisible canyon of basalt, which is also this bed and its loose legs. And you are working me, and I have reached some place in you where I gnaw down the doors in you, and my teeth grow numb as drunk fishermen, and all the roots in you suck the water from me, and I enter a depth in you that pulls your name from my throat. And you are working me, and I'm telling you I am your pilgrim, your animal, your thief, your pyre, your anvil and echo. And I want to be bound and burned here, and collapse here, and beg here, and pound here, and unspool one long sound from my body into this kingdom, where we are two wet shades of black swimming into the first evening of the universe. You know, no dead deer in that one. I think I'll just read one more and then take a few questions, and we'll have some coffee and hang out. Thanks for having me out for the series. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for braving the rain. My family history as explained by the South Fork of the river. My grandfather says he stepped out of his dream the same day my grandmother did. In this way, they entered the world. If you put your ear to his chest, you'd hear something so absolute that you'd leave for the river, enter the salmon run, and disappear through the keyhole at the river bottom. He tells me I never had a mother. My mother has always said that after her mother died giving birth and became a reflection in a mud puddle, that my grandfather turned into a dog who spent the rest of his life drinking from the pools and gravel roads. My grandmother says my mother can find anything. She says my mother is a water witch, and that's why she leaves us for days at a time and comes home ragged and soaked with rainwater. My mother has a special branch that follows the water. My grandfather says I was never born at all, that I'm just borrowing this body until something better comes along. He says I'm half bird and half fish. He says there's a house beneath the river, that I'm a riddle where a boy flies in two skies at the same time. Thank you so much.